Hello everyone, welcome to today's coffee hour. Today we are interviewing Professor Saptarshi Das. Professor Saptarshi Das obtained his Ph.D. from Purdue University in 2013. He is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Engineering Science and Mechanics at Penn State University. He leads a primarily experimental research group with current focus on 2D materials for various electronic, optoelectronic, and energy harvesting applications. Without further ado, let's welcome our interviewer today, Swati Shikha, who is currently the ECE master student as well as NSAC treasurer, to interview our dear Professor Saptarshi Das. Welcome, Professor. Over to you, Swati.
Thank you, Joy, for the introduction. Hello, Professor. Let's start with a quick icebreaker. What are some of your non-academic interests and hobbies?
Okay, yeah, sure. One of the things that I'd like to do is travel. And while traveling, I do a lot of photography. So these have been my hobbies pretty much from my graduate days.
Okay. So you're originally from India. That's right, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So being in the US, what do you miss the most about India?
The first thing I would say is the food.
Definitely.
We get an amazing food and diversity of food in India. And we do get good food here as well. But I think that's one part I do miss. The other part I also miss is essentially, social activities and of course, family and friends, right? So they're all back at home. And I think uh, the social activities is something that I do miss, like the Durga Puja that we have in Bengal or Diwali. All those celebrations are a little bit downplayed over here. So that is something I definitely miss.
Mhm. So talking about food and festivals, coming over to the US, what was your biggest cultural shock that you faced?
I don't think honestly that I experienced any cultural shock, because when I came over here, I was more of an observer of the culture that this country actually follows. And I really kind of appreciated the part that people here are much more open-minded, and the freedom of choice that you get, not only in academia, but also beyond academia, as well as the respect for any profession or any kind of a job. These are the things that I kind of see a difference coming from India, and those are the things I kind of really appreciated. Of course, the social setting is different. And it is very different compared to what we do in India when it comes to socializing compared to over here. And it's all about adaptability, right? When you are in Rome, you have to be a Roman. I think at the end of the day, it was not like a cultural shock, but I tried to observe, and it doesn't mean that I had to change myself in any way, or I was not forced to change myself. But it was an observation, and I enjoyed that.
Well said. All right. So, when did you first realize that you were interested in science or pursuing science?
That's a very good question. And I think I was always interested in academia. When I was growing up, I always wanted to be a teacher at least, and I had no experience with research until my senior years in my undergraduate studies. So science and everything has always motivated. We were reading, physics, chemistry, mathematics. These are the things that every kid in India are supposed to get trained on. And so that was automatic. And of course, I had a knack in physics and mathematics even from my childhood, or when I was introduced to those subjects. Science as a whole, I think I got more exposure to in my undergraduate days, and I started developing a knack towards more research. And that's how I kind of get into it, and then coming to Purdue to pursue PhD is kind of already shows that that knack has developed.
Nice. So, did your family play a role too? Did your parents influence your decision to take up science?
Not really. My parents never essentially enforced anything on me. In fact, they didn't even ask me to become a topper in my class. I mean, that was never a requirement for me. I
Wow.
mean,
Mhm.
they were always telling me that you simply have to make sure that you learn well. I mean, the marks and all those things are not that important. But the learning is more important. So it was never that emphasis that you have to come out first in your class or you have to study engineering. So I was lucky because I think not a lot of us people who come from India have that privilege. So in that way, I was very privileged to have parents who never essentially, asked me to deliver something. In fact, if I did bad in an exam and if I come back home, I mean, they will essentially be also sad for me because they can already understand that by having the exam being bad, I'm already kind of sad, right? There is no point of scolding me and making me even sadder. Right, so that is something that my parents always told me, and they always told me that I mean, your competition with is not with others, your competition is always with yourself. So you try to become better or perform better than what you have done in your previous exam. You don't have to beat others in the exam. So I think that is an important teaching that I got.
Yeah, that's really nice. So you mentioned that you were good at physics and maths. Were there subjects that you were bad at?
I think there were subjects that I didn't used to like. For example, I didn't used to appreciate history, geography, these kind of subjects back in my school days. And I feel like no subject is actually bad. Everything is very interesting. It is all about, how much exposure you're getting to these subjects and who is your mentor or your teachers in your school, and how are you being tested. I mean, the way our history, geography, or the literature subjects were taught, or we were asked to answer those questions in an exam, would make these subjects very uninteresting for a student to study. To be honest, late at later years, I kind of developed a lot of interest in these subjects. I like history and geography so much now than I used to like them back then. In fact, the same thing applies for biology. I do more reading on biology now than I have ever done during my school days. So I feel like it's the interest that you can inculcate in your childhood by proper mentoring makes a subject good or bad. I don't think any subject has that particular.
Merit or demerit on its
Yes.
own. I can relate to so many things. So, do you think there's an ideological difference between the Indian or the Asian system of education as compared to the American system?
I think I would say that there is, of course, there are differences and there are pros and cons of both the systems. I think the rigorousness of math and engineering or physics that we go through in our education uh, makes us definitely well prepared for STEM education when we come to the US. Right, I think so that is an advantage, but it also kind of takes away from the interest in other subjects. What I found over here is that things are much more interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. And during when I was growing up, that aspect was not there. There were rigid boundaries between departments, between subjects. It was not like a seamless cohesion or kind of a interdependence between our learning. Uh, and that's a big difference between the education system in India. And I think now things have opened up way more. Now things are also becoming way more interdisciplinary in India. But that was the difference that we have grown up with, these rigid boundaries in subjects and departments, which I didn't feel when I came to the US.
Okay. When did you decide to come to the US and how did you choose on Purdue University?
Yes. So I think in India, I mean, peer pressure does most of the things for you. Right. So I don't think when I entered my undergraduate college, Jadavpur University, I had any plans or I was even thinking that I could come to the US. Right. I mean, I was thinking of, okay, I will go to probably some IITs or IISc or TIFR to pursue my higher studies and totally not decided. But then when I was in second and third year, I found my seniors were applying to the US universities, and four of them actually got it. So then we realized that, oh, maybe it is possible. So there is a possibility that even if we do the same, follow the same path, we could also end up in doing higher studies in the US. So that is the time I decided to essentially see whether I can come to the US for my higher education. So it was mostly the path shown by the peers. In fact, one of the peers is a faculty in Purdue right now. He is Shreyas Shen. So Shreyas
Okay.
was my, senior, 1 year senior in Jadavpur University. And
Interesting.
so that's how, essentially we get into the idea of coming to the US. So that was your first question. What was your second question? You asked something else as well, right?
How did you decide on Purdue University?
Oh, yes. Right, right. I think one of the thing is that, when I was in Jadavpur University in my final year, I got a lot of interest in device physics. And I was doing some project on nanoelectronics with Dr. Hiranmay Shaha. And then he kind of introduced me to all the lectures by Dr. Shupriya Datta and Mark Lansdowne. So I used to watch those lectures in NanoHub, and that kind of motivated me and helped my learning of nanoelectronics. So I did reach out to Dr. Datta and kind of asked him whether I will be eligible to apply to Purdue, and he encouraged. And I then came, and actually initially I joined Dr. Datta's group. So that's how I chose Purdue, and luckily I get into it because Purdue is a very good school. I mean, it's challenging to get to Purdue from India.
Yeah, definitely. And what will you go for a direct PhD and not a master's first?
I think that was something that was not planned. I would say that
Okay.
I knew that I wanted to do my PhD, and getting a master's on the way could have been a possibility. But really, I haven't given a lot of thought into it because at the end of the day, if you're going for the highest degree, whether you have a master's or not have a master's, is probably not going to make a huge difference. So really, that was not something that I decided. It just happened that I went for direct PhD.
Was the transition ever difficult? Straight from bachelor's to very research intensive, rigorous PhD. Did you ever think maybe a master's could have kind of smoothed this?
Interesting question. I mean, it could have been for sure because you get a little bit more time to get to the graduate school and see how things are done. But I mean, even if you're in a PhD program, the first year is pretty much you're taking different courses and trying to fulfill your requirement. In fact, even 1.5 year or 2 years goes in that, right? And in that period, you start to get used to research. I mean, of course, there's a big hurdle because in India, we hardly get exposed to any hands-on experience. I mean, in Jadavpur University, we didn't have a lot of infrastructure to do experimental nano devices. So let's say, for example, and then when I came here, I mean, I do see this amazing Birck Nanotechnology facility, and I immediately thought that no, I really want to work in this amazing place. And that's how I got started. But then, of course, having no experience with fabrication, it of course takes a longer time. So I think definitely doing a master's and getting accustomed to research can help in your PhD, and it can make the PhD much more smoother. Otherwise, there is always bumpy roads in PhD, right? So
Were you always sure that you wanted to go into nanomaterials and the domain that you were currently in, or did you kind of get into this as you learned more and researched more?
So I think I always liked devices. Electronic devices is something that I always liked. And then when I came to Purdue and look into the facility, and I think one of the areas where Purdue is leader is nano devices. So it was a natural consequence that I started working with Professor Appenzeller. And
Okay.
I mean, he has worked a lot on carbon nanotubes. At that time, he was working on silicon nanowires. So I got into that and immediately started liking it because I already had the knack for the devices. And then now I was able to do something which were much more state of the art. So that kept me going.
Mm. So, were you always very academically oriented, or did you ever consider, oh, maybe I could do a job in the industry after this?
I think I was always looking for a job in academia. And as I told you that even when I was
Okay.
growing up, I mean, I always wanted to be a teacher. Whether I wanted to become a professor or not, that's a different issue. So that was almost pretty sure. And then, of course, I did two internships during my graduate studies in Purdue, in IBM, TJ Watson Research Center was one. And then I also went to IBM Fishkill. Of course, these places are amazing, but for the person that I am, I would like to have a little bit more freedom of, choosing what I wanted to learn, what I wanted to research on. And I think academia gives you a lot of freedom that in not of other jobs can give you. And that part of academia has always attracted me. So I think I would have always gone for this job.
Tell us a little more. What first got you excited about the idea of teaching one day?
Idea of teaching. I think I don't know. It was probably already in me to certain extent. I mean, I was always teaching my cousins, even when I was in like 10th standard or 11th standard. I did private tuition to, undergraduates and even like, 11, 12 standard students. So I was always doing that throughout my entire academic years. So it was never like there was a time when I realized that, oh, I wanted to do that. So it was kind of already in me that I would always like to teach. So although here my primary role is to do research, but I also enjoy my teaching over here. I mean, that's the another important aspect or another good part of being a professor, that you also go and get to go to the classes and interact with students. I mean, those discussions are always, something to cherish about. So I think it kind of happened naturally that I wanted to be in this profession.
Mhm. Yeah, it's nice to see people enjoying what they do. So, how do you plan your time between teaching courses and planning your research activities? And do you ever feel that one takes away from the other role?
I mean, yes, we do have to manage time, but what I can tell you is that research, of course, is the most important thing that we do in our everyday, day-to-day activity. The teaching part, I can tell you, is that we are primarily teaching pretty much the same course every year or every semester, or teaching alternate courses, right, every semester. So once you have essentially make sure that your course materials are prepared. So initial there is some kind of a steep learning curve and steep preparation curve for the teaching part. But after that, teaching becomes relatively straightforward because you simply need to update your course material based on some recent developments. And unless you are trying to offer a new course, there is not a lot that you have to put into your teaching. Of course, you have to prepare for your classes, but that preparation is way less when you're preparing for a completely new course to be taught. So the teaching, and as I told you, I mean, teaching is an enjoyable part. I have always liked it. So I don't take it as a burden at all. In fact, I like going into classes and teaching. And to be honest, I mean, when you're teaching graduate courses, I mean, these are anyways talking about your research in itself, right? So they're not very different either.
Interesting. So, you seem to have mentioned that you like interacting with students and you look forward to student interactions. So, when you look to hire students in your group, what qualities do you look for?
That's a secret, right? I shouldn't give it out. I think at the end
Okay,
of
great.
the day,
Okay.
I mean, so what I'm looking for from the student is more about their motivation and the fact that They want to do hard work, because in experiments, things might more often they will go wrong than right, right? So the learning curve is very steep, and therefore you have to continuously pursue it. So persistence and these kind of things are very important when you are doing experimental research, or for that matter, any research. Right. And so therefore, I think I'm more interested in getting students whom I see are passionate about what they want to do. And they have a lot of motivation and the intent to do hard work. Because that's what is more important. I don't think I'm looking for extremely talented students, because every human being is capable of learning things. And it is all about whether they want to learn or not. So that aspect is more important in me deciding, whether I would like to have students like that in my group.
So passion and dedication, the two things that you mentioned. So how do you keep yourself motivated or your students motivated, especially in experimental research when a lot of things don't go according to plan and there's so many failures?
Right. I think that's a tough thing for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, I think I always try to ensure that we are essentially having fun in what we are doing at the end of the day. Right. Now, you're right that in experiments, when things do not go correct, you cannot have that fun. Um, and I think that's what I'm telling. I mean, if the student has the right kind of mindset that a failure is kind of more obvious than success when it comes to research, then it is not a very difficult thing to keep us motivated and keep going, right? Because we know that if we can, at the end of the day, be successful after all these hurdles, then that will give us a lot of fun and lot of accomplishment, sense of accomplishment. So I think it's essentially about the student and how motivated and passionate they are. I think you really don't need to keep motivating them yourself if they themselves are already in that path.
Okay, so some onus lies in the students as well. Professors can only push so far.
Yes.
Mm, so, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes you see young researchers making?
That's yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I think I don't see it like that there is anything called mistake. I mean, it is all about learning. Whenever you even do a mistake, you're actually at the end of the day learning something from that mistake, right? So, and every researcher has his or her own way, right? And I cannot say that this way is right and this way is wrong. uh, One thing I could simply suggest is that any researcher should do what they would like to do rather than what they're forced to do, right? So that is very important. You need to identify what your passion is in the graduate school, right? Do not do things that you do not feel happy at the end of the day about. Uh, and that is something I would just consider. I don't think there is any mistake. The greatest mistake you can commit is not by following your passion. So just follow your passion, and then I don't think there is anything called mistake. I mean, it's only learning. I mean, even if you do not succeed, you will be able to learn from that.
Well said. So we talked a lot about passion. How important do you think that is? And what are some of the other non-academic things that you're passionate about?
Right. So I think I feel like you should do a job which is your passion. I mean, often people ask about your job and some hobby. I feel like if your hobby can become your job, then I don't think that's probably the best case scenario, right? I mean, people talk about the balance between work and life and all those kind of things. For me, it's actually very different. Actually, for me, if what I do I enjoy all the time, then there is no kind of a boundary between work and non-work, right? So that's what I say, that as long as we I mean, for example, research is kind of my passion. So uh, I don't feel like coming 8 a.m. in the morning and then leaving 5 p.m. in the morning. That's the boundary of my research, right? I'm willing to do research anytime and every time. right? So I mean, that's very important for me. And as I mentioned, apart from that, I think traveling and doing some photography is something that I also enjoy. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I answered your question or not.
Okay. Do you think passion and discipline go hand in hand? You could have all the passion in the world, but if you don't have the discipline to follow through, do you think passion is useless without discipline?
I think that's probably the right statement to make. Although I mean, discipline is something that may also vary, depend upon the person to person, right? Uh, I mean, you can always define discipline at like getting up 5 a.m. in the morning and then doing your all of your work by like 5 p.m. and then you do something else. Or I mean, I don't know what do I call discipline at that way, right? I mean, at the end of the day, as you can, if you can do your time management properly, right? I mean, you have to take care of when we are in US. I mean, we are doing everything by ourselves, right? I mean, it's not only that we have to do our job, but we also have to have responsibility back home, right? As long as you are being able to manage time and your responsibility, that is what I would call discipline, right? And that, along with your passion, could definitely help you succeed.
So, are there any tricks that you could teach us about managing our time or better managing our time?
I don't think I am a good manager of time myself. So I don't think I can give you advice because I do work all weird hours of time. I mean, so I don't think I'm a good time manager. And I think we all know when we are graduate students in Birck, I used to go 2 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning, whenever you get the tools available. So I think for me, it is very difficult to tell, whether there is a trick to manage your time. Just follow, your ultimate goal or whatever goal you have set up for at least for your near future, and do whatever that needs in order to get to that goal.
Mhm. So, do you plan out your weeks in advance, or are you more dynamic and you figure out your goals and objectives as you move into your days?
Yeah, mostly on the go, but of course there are meetings and I have to teach classes on my regular time, so that I cannot decide on the go. So there are part of my routine which are fixed, which I have to follow. But there are other part, like for example, the research part, for example, is more dynamic, right? So I still come and work with
Okay.
my students in the lab, and that typically happens only after 6 or 7 when all the meetings are done. And that's what I'm saying. This is the greatest part of being in academia. You have the freedom to decide when do you want to work, and so that aspect is very important.
Mhm. So, what portion of your time goes into research and what portion into teaching? If you had to say a split, let's say 60-40, what would you say that would be?
I think if you define teaching just as taking classes, then it is different compared to even having a conversation with a student, because that I think is teaching each other, right? I mean, I learn something from the student learns something from me. So those discussions I would also consider to be part of teaching, right? So then even when I'm in the lab, probably doing an experiment with my student, I'm constantly talking to that student, trying to uh, talk through the device ideas and things like that. So it's probably going to be very difficult for me to distinguish as such between teaching and research, because I think they are intertwined. But if it's only the course related work, then probably I spend maybe 20% of my time or maybe 15% of my time in teaching, and the rest is going to be research.
Yeah, that's a good point. That teaching happens everywhere. So we touched upon a lot of things that you love about academia. Is there anything that you hate about academia?
I don't think so. I'm a
Okay.
biggest proponent and a biggest champion of putting people in academia. I think this academic job is something, from my perspective, this is probably the best job that you can have. So I will not have any negative points about academia. I mean, there are instances. I mean, in every job, there will be certain hiccups, right? I mean, but if you really love what you do, I don't think those are big things. So you can manage. Yeah. So I don't see any negative of being in academia.
So when your students talk to you about their plans to get a job, do you ever try to nudge them in the other direction? Maybe look at academic positions too.
Oh, all the time. All the time I try to do that. Yes, I mean, all my graduate students, I will try to do, I mean, try to encourage them to pursue their career in academia. Yes, I do. But I mean, of course, they also have their personal choices, and I do appreciate that part. But I also try to give them the pros of
Bigger
this side.
picture, the pros
Yeah,
of.
bigger picture, of course. Yes.
Hmm. So, is there a difference between being a teacher and being a professor?
Okay, I mean, being a professor gives you much more responsibility, right? I mean, I'm not doing only teaching. I also have to make sure that my students can do research. They can, think independently. They can grasp the subject matter better, right? I mean, when I'm teaching a course, yes, at the end of the day, I'm probably just going to grade the students, right? I'm going to give them the grades. But research is not about just giving the grades, right? It's a everyday process. So you have to essentially develop that kind of a mindset, skills, communication skills. How do you essentially talk about your research to the others? So there's a multiple different aspects which you essentially have to do as a professor compared to a teacher. And on top of that, essentially, I also have the responsibility that the student needs to finish their thesis and their work in a timely manner. And most of our projects are funded projects, right? So those have deadlines. So essentially, I also have to ensure that we are meeting those deadlines for research. So these are the things I think which are also very important as a professor that we have to maintain and make sure the students are able to, kind of do things in a timely manner.
I see you heavily lean towards academia. So, is there anything you wish someone had told you before you began applying for academic positions?
I think one thing that is very important is networking. Whether you're wanting to get a job in industry or in academia, networking is very important because you know that any position where you're applying to industry or academia is very competitive nowadays, right? So you can only get an edge if you or your work is already known by your future employer, right? And that is something you can do by doing more networking. Now, when I was a graduate student, I honestly didn't go to a lot of conferences, and I did not probably appreciate too much about the idea about communicating your research to the other. You know what we call the dissemination of research. We do write journal papers, but there are like 10,000 journal papers that comes out every day, right? And it is not possible that your future employee is going to read all those papers, right? So therefore, you have to bring your research to your future employer's notice. And that is something that I probably did not do in my graduate school or during my graduate life, but during my postdoctoral research, I realized that that is very important, that you have to essentially sell your own research. Otherwise, nobody will know about it. And that is something I think is very important for anyone who wants to go into academia, or even for that matter in a job, right? If you go to more conferences or in more workshops, you go to meet these people who are going to be your future employer, and if they have talked to you earlier, then they are already having some kind of opinion or some kind of knowledge that, oh, this guy does this, so therefore this person could be a good fit for the job that I have in mind. So networking is very important.
Okay, makes sense. So, you mentioned the importance of networking. So, what roles do you think peer appreciation or peer recommendation plays, especially pertaining to jobs or careers in academia?
Right. In academia, recommendations are very important. I mean, I can tell you because now I'm also in different faculty search committees, right? And because I'm on the other side of the table, I can see now what the committees are typically looking for. So of course, your resume has to be pretty good, no doubt about that. But at the same time, it is also very important how strong is your recommendation letter. So I can't say anything about an industry job, how the recommendation letters do play a role. But in academic job, it is very important. And the recommendation letter from your advisor is even more important because that is the person who is going to judge you and who is going to write the things about your academic potential, right? So those letters are very important.
Okay. So networking is important and being recognized by your peer is important. All right. Let me switch gears a bit and let me ask you something different. So your research is very experimental in nature. Did you ever consider pursuing theoretical research? And what do you think about the whole debate between theoretical versus experimental research? Do you think one is more important than the other, or what are your thoughts?
I think experimental research and theoretical research are just our two legs. I mean, if you cut one, I mean, it's very difficult to stand on the other. So I don't think there is a debate between experimental and theoretical research. Both are essentially complementary to each other. You know, you cannot do 1,000 experiments. And At the same time, you cannot essentially, live in an idealistic world, which is essentially in the theory. So theory and experiment simply go hand in hand. I mean, one cannot exist without the other. So I don't think there's a debate between which one is more important. I think both are equally important. And
And
in
did you
fact, I
ever?
mean, in our group as well, I mean, we try to do always, some kind of a theoretical or simulation related work. Because nowadays, even if you want to publish a paper in a good journal, you need to have all aspects covered. You not only need experimental data, but you also need to validate it using theoretical modeling or simulation results. So I think these are both equally important.
Okay, well said. So when you're planning out projects or when you're planning out what problems next to pursue, would you ever say that projects ever go according to plan?
I think projects never go according to plan. In experiments, for sure, and I think it's also true for maybe theoretical folks as well. Sometimes you find new things, which becomes much more exciting, right? And sometimes you kind of find that the ideas that you have are not going to work. I think one thing that is very important is to make a decision at the right point of time on any project, whether the idea is worth pursuing further, because there is always a balance between your risk versus gain, right? So essentially, you have to make that judgment, and you have a finite amount of time. It is not that you have infinite amount of time to keep trying.
Correct.
So you have a finite amount of time, and therefore you have to make that judgment whether project is going to be successful or not. Well, at the same time, you also have to keep an open eye on the results that you're obtaining. Because if you're only one-minded in getting the result that you need to show your sponsor, then you will never be able to, essentially do something which is more breakthrough type. You have to keep your eyes open on seeing something new in your experiments or in your theoretical research. So both are very important.
Okay. You mentioned ideas. How do you evaluate the merit of an idea and say, oh, this is something worth pursuing?
I think there are multiple things that I typically tend to see when I have an idea. Number one is that any idea, because we do experiments, requires resources, right? So first thing is that whether we do have those resources in the university, in my lab, or in the user facility that we are in. So without resources, you cannot implement your idea. That is number one. Number two is how much expertise do you need in order to execute that idea? Because your idea may not be exactly what you are working on right now, right? Uh, because then that is not an idea. If it's an idea, it has to be at least 20 or 30%, or sometimes even 50 or 60% different from what you are doing right now, right? So you also have to evaluate, whether you have the adequate expertise in your team in order to pursue that idea. Otherwise, you have to find right collaborators, right? And either the collaborators are going to be in your university or somewhere else. That is another thing that you have to essentially judge. Now, once you have decided that, then you have to make an honest assessment about what kind of, even if I have all the resources, even if I ensure that I have all the expertise, the next thing that I would really calibrate is that if I write a proposal on that, whether that idea can get funded, right? Because without having the funds, even if you have resources, you will not be able to execute the research. So fundability of an idea is also very important. And then finally, how much amount of time it's going to take, you have to make an honest assessment about that. Whether it's a PhD project or a master's project, that has to be evaluated. And the other thing is also risk mitigation. If the idea does not succeed, is there a plan B? And at what point I would have to switch to that plan B. So these are the things I would probably decide before making sure, that I kind of start pursuing an idea in a really and put a lot of effort into it.
Okay. Mm, so choosing when to switch to plan B and figuring out if an idea doesn't work out, all of this comes from experience?
I think that do come from experience. I think when you are a graduate student, your advisor will help you to do that, right? When to stop pursuing a particular processing step and move on to a new one, right? And that happened to me multiple times. And then when you are a postdoc, I mean, you have limited time anyways because your contract is like 2 to 3 years. So then you yourself are under that time constraint. So you have to make that decision. And then once you become faculty, these things are determined by many different factors, right? I mean, a student has to graduate, a master's student has to graduate within 2 to 2.5 years, and a PhD student has to graduate within 4 to 5 years, right? And therefore, when you switch to plan B, all depends upon that. I mean, if you are in your fourth year of your PhD and if you do not have a single publication, it's probably a
Yeah,
good time to
that's
switch to
scary.
plan B.
Okay. Would you also agree that no matter how good the idea, it needs to be sold right?
Yes, I think it is important. You have to essentially make sure that your idea is understandable by the others and others also appreciate the value of that idea. So it has to be sold. I mean, sold is probably not the right word to use, but I think, yeah, I mean, you can say that it has to be sold to the funding agencies because they are going to give you the money to do that research. But yes, it's very important.
So we talked a little about the constraints we face in research. What are some of your biggest frustrations that you have felt while pursuing an idea or in the course of your research?
I think depends on what I'm trying to pursue, right? I mean, uh, sometimes it could be a lot of trouble when I'm trying to fabricate a particular complex structure, right? I mean, that could be a lot of frustration because things do not work out, right? uh, I mean, if it is some kind of a very critical measurements, I mean, you need to make sure that your measurement tools and everything is calibrated properly. And oftentimes and not you get a lot of artifacts. So, and that could also be a frustration point. I mean, it depends upon your day-to-day experience with the research and what exact project you are working on. But I think that at the end of the day, I mean, if you are thinking about the problem, thinking about your research, then you will be able to overcome these things in a reasonable period of time without going through a lot of frustration. I mean, you will be able to honestly judge, and your advisor will definitely help you. And talking through and having discussions regularly will definitely help you to avoid these kind of frustrations.
Okay. I would also like to remind the audience that they can post their questions or unmute them and ask if they have anything to. So coming back to your professor, if you had to give a piece of advice to a grad student, a postdoc, and an assistant professor, what would those be, and how different would these be from each other?
So for a graduate student, I think the advice will depend upon what they want to pursue, right? I mean, if they want to go to industry, then my advice will be different from if they want to pursue an academic career. right? I mean, for the industry, I think one of the things that you need to start again, I mean, for both type of jobs, networking is very important. For academic job, you have to start networking way earlier compared to your industry job. Industry job, even if you start doing the networking a year before, it's already good enough. If you can probably go for an internship in one of the companies, in your area of interest, that would definitely help. But if you are trying to pursue a career in academia, then there are a lot of things that you probably have to start pretty early. Networking is definitely one of them, going to conferences, giving oral and poster presentations so that people are aware of your face and exactly what you are doing, right? So it is always good to associate a face with an idea or a particular area that you're working on. And then on the top of that, I think for academic job, the publication is very important. You do not need to have a lot of publications for sure, but you need to have publications which are essentially real contribution to the field. So instead of trying to look for numbers of publication, I think the quality of publication plays a more important role in academic positions. So and I can tell that because now I'm trying to see, from the other side, that as a committee, as a search committee, what people are essentially looking for. And I think the other thing that is also very important, I mean, so these are for the graduate students, but I think at the end of the day, I would also kind of recommend that you have to essentially find your passion in your either in your research or non-research activities during your graduate school, and that's also very important, right? Because if you are not happy with your job, then it's not going to be worth pursuing for a longer term. So find that out as early as possible, because then you can plan your career a little bit better. Because for academic careers, you need to at least give 2 to 3 years for you to find the job that you are looking for. So that, I mean, I don't know if that's an advice, but I think that these are the things that I would probably recommend any graduate student, even in my group, to kind of consider early.
Okay.
And towards the end of your graduate, kind of in your fourth or fifth year, you should be trying to do something independent, should be able to come up with ideas which are independent uh, compared to what your advisor is telling you to do. So you should be able to do that in your senior years. Right. So if at least one project you should do, which is at least have 50 to 60% of your own intellectual contribution. Uh, and for the postdocs, I think the situation is always tricky. I mean, because you know that you have 2 years or 3 years essentially to enhance your resume. Because when you are doing a postdoc, you are inevitably trying to get into academia, right? Otherwise, there is no point of doing a postdoc. You should straight go to the industry. And in the postdoc, I think this independent research becomes even more important. So there you really have to demonstrate that this is something that you have bring in to the group that you are joining, right? You might be joining a big group, but you have to come up with your own idea and work on that idea and demonstrate that your idea is viable. And of course, the requirement for publications also increases, because in a graduate school, you would expect like, okay, if we have 3 to 4 publication, that is very good. But in postdoc, even in 2 years, I mean, you would probably wanted to have equal number of publication that you would have in your graduate life. Of course, if a graduate student is, spectacular and having 10 publication, that is very difficult to match. I was not one of those graduate students for sure. So I think postdoc is essentially enhancing your resume, and during your postdoc phase, you need to make sure that you do networking even more. Uh, and therefore, going to the conferences and talking to people is even more important in postdoc. For assistant professor, I don't think I have any. I'm still an assistant professor. I probably not give any advice at this point of time. I think, but I think I feel like it is more important to enjoy the job. I mean, we are all under this continuous, scare of the tenure and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think if you love your job, you will make it through your tenure. I think that's not going to be that critical, unless you are in some institutions which are little bit more notorious and not known for keeping their assistant professor. Most of the US universities typically try to keep the people whom they have hired, because otherwise it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, the university have also done a lot of investment on us. And they are not simply doing that investment because after the end of 6 years, they simply want to throw us out. University puts in a lot of effort as well. So I think there is not to be too much scared about this tenure process. As long as you love your research and your job, I think you will be able to make it through it. So
So loving your job is the key through all of this.
yeah, of course. I mean, at any time, at any day, right? I mean, there is nothing better than if you essentially like the job and your passion is your job, right? I mean,
Perfect.
I think that's what I feel. I mean, is probably missing in many people actually, because I mean, I don't know. For me, I feel like if your hobby or your passion becomes your means to livelihood, and there is nothing better than that.
So we have a question from the audience. What is a quality publication and what constitutes a low quality publication?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think at the end of the day, I mean, a good quality publication is something which other peers can read and learn something new about, right? I mean, you could always publish an article, which is kind of probably incremental or essentially, maybe let's say, for example, I give you an example, just change the material and just do the same experiment and get some new results. That is much more incremental, right? I mean, there is no new knowledge that your peers are going to learn from that paper. So a good quality paper is something where your peers get to learn something new. And that could be in any area. And I mean, there is no example of bad publication, right? I mean,
A poorly researched one, I'm guessing.
I mean, it's a relative thing, right? I mean, what do you define a good versus a bad publication, right? It's completely relative.
Okay.
For me, a good publication, I can only define good because there is no yardstick to measure bad, right? You could only measure something that is good. And for me, good is something if I read a paper and I say, oh, today I learned something new,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it is okay to report,
Nice.
record high numbers and all those kind of things. That's absolutely fine. And we all do that. I mean, because we are at the end of the day in a rat race and we have to do that, run that race. But the papers which stands out longer term are the ones which have something unique. I mean, you will find that the records are being broken every time in many different areas where it comes to, devices or materials or whatever it is. But if you can highlight something new, then that is going to stay forever. And those ultimately get cited.
Okay. Yeah, that's well said. We have another question from the audience. So they compliment you on being calm and chill. They ask you, how do you remain so optimistic under all of this pressure? Or do you not feel any pressure at all?
I honestly, I don't think I feel a lot of pressure. I really enjoy this job. I mean, I honestly enjoy every bit of it. I mean, and the greatest treasure I think I have is actually my students. I mean, interacting with the students and having discussion with them. I think even if I do not make it to the tenure, I mean, I will end up in somewhere. I mean, right? I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, I always think about the fact that I'm already extremely, extremely privileged, right? I mean, the fact that I have, this nice, wonderful office, I have, food to eat every day, and I have, a healthy body. I mean, that is already a lot. I think beyond, I mean, we should be really show a lot of gratitude towards what we already have because we are the most privileged one in this society, right? And a lot of people do not even have this much that we have gotten. So even if I do not get my tenure, even if I do not get another paper published, how is it going to make any difference? I mean, I'm still going to be able to live pretty well, right? And that can keep your cool, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really nice attitude to have. Mm, since we are drawing towards the close, let me ask you a few more questions and then I think we'll wrap up. So the way you said, good quality papers are the ones that make you learn something new and they're the ones that get cited. So on similar notes, what do you want your legacy as a researcher to be?
I don't think I'm going to become a legend, so I'm not probably going to leave behind any legacy. I mean, just think about what all those big scientists say, right? I mean, their life, they could be like a particle in the beach. I mean, I am not even a nanoparticle, right? So I don't think I'm going to leave behind any legacy. I just wanted to make sure that I enjoy my research and I have my fun. I learn something new. And in the process, if something interesting and great comes out, then I'm again privileged. I think that it came out of my research. Otherwise, I don't think I consider myself to become a legend at all. I mean, I'm nowhere close to that.
Mm, I really like your attitude, how you're willing to work towards things you love. So far, what do you think is your most important work?
My most important work, I feel like, I mean, uh, whenever I do any kind of a research, it's almost like it's your baby, right? I mean, like parents cannot distinguish between their kids. I think it is very difficult to distinguish between what you have done in your research. Of course, there are papers, for example, which when people come and tell you that I have read this paper of yours and I have really learned something from that, that I think is a good accomplishment. And I think I don't define that is my greatest work as such. But I think those are probably the work because people have learned something new from those papers, right? It is not that I have written all the papers from which people have learned something. I have also written papers which are simply, just for writing another paper, right? It has happened because at the end of the day, I mean, when we are looking for this academic position, we also wanted to have more number of publications, and we do all run in that rat race. But I'm trying to say that you should have at least one or couple of papers where it is your original contribution, and then you can have other papers as well, because we are in the business of publishing, so we have to keep publishing our research results because we have to show progress as well, and that is also very important. I'm not, don't take me wrong on the part that don't publish anything that doesn't have any thing that people can learn. Of course, do publish your research, but you should have a few where people can come back to you and say that, oh, this paper of yours, I really learned something from that. And that then kind of you so determines that the impact of your work, and then you feel good about it, I guess.
We have one more question from the audience. They ask you that most of your research is very new and very unique, one of the first ideas in the field. How do you make decisions to pursue those ideas given that there may not be sufficient background?
Right. So I think one thing I kind of have decided, I mean, is the fact that um, so as I told you, when I was uh, in my schools, I did not like the biology at all. Okay, because how it was taught in my school particularly. And then when I came to Purdue, I, out of my interest, took a course in neurobiology. It was an undergraduate course, and I liked that course so much. Then I decided that in the future I would definitely like to do something which is related to biology. Now, as I told you, that I cannot have an idea now which is completely submerged into some core biological aspect, because I do not have that expertise, number one. And number two, the number of resources that I have in my lab are not, tuned towards those kind of research. So then I thought about, essentially trying to see how I can relate my research to some aspects of biology. So I started reading more about biology, and then trying to see, how these animals and their brains actually work. And then it's also very humbling that we humans always consider ourselves to be a superior being, but honestly, I mean, our capabilities are very limited. and some of the animals, outsmart Earth in many different aspects. So, and knowing about that, and then trying to essentially read those papers and then see how they accomplish this extraordinary ability, and then how can we essentially relate that to our research, is something that I wanted to do anyways. And now, as I told you, the academia gives you that freedom, right? I mean, you can pursue whatever you want to do. That is probably not going to be possible in a company, because those type of companies do not exist anymore. There is no more Bell Lab, there is no more TJ Watson Research Center, right? So there are very less in our area of interest. So the only way I could pursue this kind of ideas is in academia, because no one is going to come and tell me that, oh no, you cannot work on this thing. So that's how I got into this area of biomimetic computing and sensing. It requires a lot of reading of things, and I kind of always enjoyed that, to learn something new about new areas. And that's how we keep doing things, I guess.
I guess there are no more questions from the audience. So thank you, Professor, for speaking to us. I feel very humbled listening to your stories. The way you talked about your passion and your ideas. Thank you so much for sharing your stories.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me on the Birck Coffee Hour. It's always good to talk to folks in Birck. I mean, it's always reminds me of my Purdue days. I mean, I really enjoyed my graduate life. I mean, both academic and non-academic things that happened in Purdue has really shaped my career. So I think I'm really privileged to have gotten this opportunity to work in the Birck Nanotechnology Center and Purdue. And thanks for having me. I mean, it's always a great pleasure.